Okay. So hello and welcome to the first Tools for Frontline Staff session of this year. Welcome everyone and Happy New Year to everyone. And today's meeting, we've just got one presentation from Jonathan Lang, who's going to talk about the council tax collection for this year and the notices that residents will be receiving as part of that. So I'll hand over to Jonathan.
Hi there, thank you. I'll just try and share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. I'll try and remember to move on through the slides, but do shout if I forget. So, we'll work out how to update. Here we go. So we're updating our council tax recovery notices. You may know that the Council Tax Service has been undergoing a review over the last year. And one of the recommendations was to update our notices. Over the years, these have been tweaked, but the last major changes happened in 2014, when we were supported by the Money Advice Trust to use the right kind of wording and style. But obviously things have moved on since then. In 2023, we redesigned the first reminder notice, the one which is most often issued. We used the external consultants. We reviewed the notices that other councils and private organisations use. And we also carried out user research directly with residents. We asked them what they expected or needed to see on these notices, how things should be worded, and we received some really useful feedback. We tried to incorporate everything, but space is limited, and the legislation governing council tax requires us to send these notices and to say certain things. And that can come across as threatening. And one of the major issues we had and still have to an extent is that some residents will not contact us when they feel threatened. They would more likely bury their heads in the sand or perhaps go through some longer method of contacting us, such as using advice agencies first. So whilst getting advice is a good thing, any delay can result in recovery action progressing further. So it is always better to contact the council first, because we have procedures and processes in place to help residents get advice or additional help. And our links to the voluntary sector are so much stronger these days. So getting the information and messaging across clearly was really important because we can help residents who are struggling and falling behind with their payments. It would also prevent unnecessary calls to our contact centre, which is busy enough as it is. And finally, perhaps most importantly, it would also result in more cost-effective collection of much-needed income for services. Council tax contributes around £145 million per year to fund the services we provide. So, in summary, we need to ensure that the notices tell customers they've missed a payment, what will happen if they don't pay, how to contact us through preferred channels, provide advice on how to pay and other useful information, and ensure the notice is legally correct. So this is an example of an old reminder notice. And there are a number of different types for different circumstances, but they say much the same thing. The reverse has details about how to pay and how to receive help if residents are struggling with the cost of living. The next slide shows the wording a little more clearly, hopefully. I'll just let you have a quick read of that and digest it. The reminder did have helpful information on the back, as I said, but apart from the sentence about direct debit, this was not clear on the front, and potentially residents would not read the back of the notice anyway. As I mentioned earlier, we updated the first reminder, which has been in use since April 2024, and it now looks like this. You can see it's quite a long way removed from the original, and the next two slides show the wording more clearly. So I've split it. This is the top, the middle of the reminder. It makes it clear the instalments that might have been missed, when it needs to be paid by, how they can get help. And the next slide has information down the bottom about what to do and what would happen if you don't do that. So it's difficult to assess the impact of the changes because there are just too many variables and other things happening in our world. But what I can say is that there have been no complaints about the design, and anecdotally it has prevented residents calling unnecessarily, whilst at the same time encourage those who need to speak to us to do so, or to self-serve by using the online information and forms on our website. I monitor the telephone calls into our service closely, and you may know that when we have mobile telephone numbers or emails in our system, we will send courtesy messages when somebody is overdue a payment to remind them a few days before issuing a notice like this. On the odd occasion, these courtesy messages have not been sent for one reason or another, and in the past, when that has happened, it has resulted in large increase in phone calls when the notice is received, and the residents then phone us up. However, since the introduction of these new style reminders, I've noticed that actually when we haven't been able to send the courtesy messages, that there's been little or no change to the volume of calls received. So what that tells me is that the way they've been designed and the wording that is used is indeed helping residents to know what to do, to take the right actions, and to pay without having to contact the council by phone and sit in a potentially long queue to be answered. And that helps those who do need to contact and speak to somebody, having been prompted by the very same information on the notice, to get through and be assisted by our colleagues in the customer service team. So we will be applying the same sort of wording and design to all our other reminders and the final notice very soon. This is the example of the final notice, and I should mention that final notices are the one thing that creates the most traffic, the most phone calls, the most, perhaps even the most distress. And this is what it used to look like in full. And this is the wording in the middle of it. I'll just let you have a brief read. So we're trying to explain it, but it's fairly blunt, and all in one paragraph is not good for ease of reading. So this is what, let's look there. So this is what the new council tax final notice will look like. Very similar to the reminder, with the exception that it will explain clearly that the right to instalments has already been lost at this point. So to avoid court action on the full balance, residents must pay in full or contact us to agree an arrangement to pay or to discuss any issues that they need help with. The draft templates for all of these notices are with our external printers now, and we expect to have proofs back to check and approve before the end of this month. So all being well, they could be in use before the end of this financial year, ahead of the expected deadline, which was April, and of course the start of the new financial year. So now, are there any questions?
Thank you, Jonathan. And I think, this is something that's been discussed for quite a long time. The importance of using plain English when we send out letters, and these council tax bills are really important, and people can get very stressed when they receive a kind of reminder or red bill. So I think this is really, really welcome stuff, and I think what you've you've presented is a lot. It represents a much better option than what we've got already. But I'll bring you in, Abby.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was really great to see. And you answered one of my questions, which was, when will this go live? Or I guess I wrote down, when did this go live? But it's exciting that that sort of just much clearer. It looks so much clearer. If I was receiving that, that's how I would want to receive information. So really, really good work. And I'm excited what that will mean for residents and for their families. And just thinking, when people watch this recording back, it's a lighter group today, probably the first of the year. People aren't quite back into the tools sessions yet. Those numbers that will be on the letters, I noticed a couple that were in the boxes with the QR codes, and then in the bottom, kind of the things you can do, the happy face steps you can take, and one of them's call an advisor. Does that go directly to someone who is live on the phone? Does that go to kind of the automated message of select number 1 for this line, or number 2? Who would people reach if they call those numbers?
Yes, it goes to the customer services team, who handle the council tax calls for us for these stages of recovery up until the call, the summons to call. But there is a short IVR option at the moment that may well extend a little bit, because there's some work going on as well to improve the service that we're giving people via the phone, and to help try and encourage those people that are able to go online to do that rather than hang on the phone, because we know that the people who need the most help are more likely to ring us up rather than just find the answer for themselves online. So that's what there's the whole package is about, trying to get people that don't need to ring us to use other forms of contacting us.
Thanks, Jonathan. Chanel?
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for your presentation. Just a quick query around the lines of communication to residents. I've spoken to some, or some have communicated with me, that they've previously have received communications via email, some via text message. So 2-point question. One is is anything being done to kind of check what's the best form of communication to residents, so that they are aware of, those who perhaps are, really feel really pressured or inundated with, communications around the council tax, and perhaps don't feel like they can approach it head on directly with yourselves. But is there a way in which they are being contacted outside of letters, and is that up to date? And secondly, is there a way in which people are, I guess, supported to perhaps come directly to yourselves? Because there is, I guess, a history of people not feeling as though they can come directly to the council, as you previously stated. They may feel as if they should be going to outside agencies just for fear of, trying to get their council tax issues resolved.
I'm trying to remember everything you said.
Just to clarify, just basically the forms of communications to residents, is that being checked and updated so that your records are accurate, aside from postal, letters or form of communication? Is that something that is being checked to make sure people are able to communicate review and receiving the communications. But from what you've shown us, the visuals do seem to work really well. They seem to be very appealing and perhaps a bit more friendly for people to get in touch with yourselves and not feel threatened by the fact that it's council tax and I need to pay and this is a major debt that I need to kind of tackle.
Yeah, so it's difficult for us to tailor to each particular type of resident or certain communications. For a start, with recovery, our legislation says we have to send notices by post. Otherwise, any court action that we took would not be legal going forward. So at the moment, until council tax legislation catches up with the real world, we have to send things by post. So therefore, we do try to also contact people via mobile phone or through text messaging and emailing. And we do that 3 or 4 days in advance of when the reminder would normally be issued. So they get so it's like they're already overdue. So they might be a week overdue. And then they get the reminder on their phone or on their email to say, oh, you've missed a payment, but you're going to need to pay this within a couple of days. So that information is going out, and it's been really useful. We partner with an outside company who seem to be right at the forefront of this kind of communication. And I don't know if many of you might live in Hackney and might have noticed or received any of these, but the style of the text message is not what it used to be. So a couple of years ago, you'd be getting just a blank a couple of lines. I think 160 characters was the maximum that we could issue. So it had to be quite blunt and give as much info as we could. But now you get what they call RCS messaging, and it's much different. It's styled for smartphones, which the vast majority of people will have now. And it works for both Android and for Apple. And you get the option, so you see what the message is. There's a verification to make sure that you are the person who should have got the message. And once you pass that, you get the option to then go straight to a payment line or to go to the council website and find appropriate forms that you want to complete because you've got a query. And it has other information as well. So it's bang up to date in the style that we're doing. And we capture that information. With some of it is we capture the contact details. Some of it is historical, but most of it now is through the online forms that we ask people to communicate to us by. And there's a number of different reasons why we do that. But in particular, it makes sure that we get everything that we need regarding a particular issue so that we can answer it as quickly as possible and not have to contact a person again for further information, for example. And it's mandatory to put in a mobile number and an email address on that. And so we can get that information that way. And then obviously the messages that we sent, they're courtesy messages. We don't have to do it. It costs the council to do it. If the council really wanted to save money, we'd end up stopping them all, which is something we would never want to do, and certainly wouldn't want to go down that route now that we've got to a point where where it's working. And it's supporting the other kind of work that we're doing through the notices. So that there's a whole big package. And just going on to the other thing that you mentioned about getting support directly. We've got one phone number for customer services that handle all council tax inquiries up till, as I say, a summons to court stage. There are methods of escalation of particular cases. So if it was a voluntary partner that was contacting us on behalf of a resident, they can use the escalation route that Rachel mentioned at the beginning as a way of getting into our service more quickly and to get to perhaps a more skilled level of person dealing with it. Because the customer services officers, they are fully council tax trained and have knowledge of other things as well. but their day-to-day job is just handling phone calls and dealing with basic inquiries. So anything that then becomes complex, maybe because somebody is in hardship and going through the court process or had enforcement agents or something like that, there is a way of getting through more quickly to somebody from the back office who I manage. And one of those teams is the stop and opt team that handle those escalations. And the way that we're trying to handle inquiries now is a much more holistic way than it might have been done in the past. So they have more wide knowledge of benefits and the help that can be obtained. They've got very close links with the Here's Help team, for example, and they exchange information all the time and case help. So we're doing everything that we can to try and help residents not go down the route of council tax recovery, because that costs us as well. So,
Thank you. Can I just ask, lastly, so what would that look like for people who perhaps are vulnerable, elderly, and perhaps don't have people to advocate for them, and maybe in hospital for whatever reason, and are unable to respond to letters and are not don't have the digital access to any account information? What does that look like for them? The process of any council tax issues or recovery.
So we've got a vulnerability policy, which is known to all the staff, and they should be following that policy. It gives tips and advice on how to handle somebody that presents as potentially vulnerable, to ask the right kind of questions, because sometimes they won't admit to what the real issue is. So they present with the issue of having a recovery notice or had the bailiffs knock at the door, but actually behind that is a whole load of other issues where they didn't know that they could claim for benefit, they didn't know they could have a discount, all the rest of it. So, and had we known about those circumstances at the very earliest stage, we could have avoided all of that pain and trouble that they've had to go through, and the money that we've had to spend to try and get them to contact. So we've got that kind of underpinning everything. Staff should be able to identify when people are vulnerable, and when they are, we note it on the case, so that in future, if they contact again, somebody immediately knows what the main situation is. And in certain circumstances where somebody is permanently vulnerable, for example, they're suffering from severe mental impairment, which is the current phrase we have to use until that gets changed in our legislation. Those will never go to the bailiffs if we know about it. And that's the crux of the matter. We need to know what a resident's circumstances are in full for us to be able to help them. So that answers that. I hope Neil's not asking me.
Daniel?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan and Rachel. I just had a quick one, just about sort of, as you were talking about vulnerable people, in terms of the messaging, is there anything done for like the 1% of Hackney's residents that don't understand English at all, as per the 2021 census? And if they don't have someone to advocate for them or help them, support them, if they do have, a letter or a message, is there anything sort of done with the council tax to support that? Or any provision for that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because up until as at now, the only notice that has information about translations, and it just basically says, if you would like this notice translated, please call them this number, and it's the same number as the customer services number. And the only one that has that is the summons. And that is not how I have wanted it to be. But unfortunately, the space that's available to us to provide to get all the information onto the other notices is just not there. So, and I discussed this with our transformation team that were helping me redesign these notices. And we have got something on the back of the notice about translation information. it's not the same thing. It's as much as we can fit in at the moment. We have a shared service to arrange translations, and that can be either a live translation over the phone, or it can be getting a document fully translated. And it's a shared service that, with a couple of other councils. So there is provision for it. I'm not entirely happy with where we are in that at the moment, but I do hope that maybe a next phase of looking at our communications will be looking at that particular issue.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, Jonathan. Neil?
Hi, it's right, Jonathan. I haven't got a question. I was just going to belt and braces some of it that Jonathan's explained. Just so everyone's aware as well, one of the reasons for moving to RCS rather than standard messaging is that is the council's text message number that cannot be cloned and used by anyone. So it gives an element of security to residents to know that when they get that message, it is from Hackney, not someone using it for nefarious means. And also, Chanel, going back to what you said, if we have someone's phone number, mobile phone number or email address, and they don't want to receive documents or notifications that way, they can contact us and we'll still retain the number. We'll just take them out of that process. So, unfortunately, it's my job to sort of think of the money side of it, just to give you a feel. Those messages reduce our reminder runs by about a third. So if anyone's posted a letter recently, you'll know that the price of post, it's not going down anytime soon. So the amount of savings we can make to the council, and I know we're talking about the hazards, that's another reason for doing it. It's one that the resident doesn't get, quote, a stroppy red letter from us, but equally it's really beneficial to the council that we don't have to send those notices via the Royal Mail at somewhat heavy costs. And I'm going to be really nice to Jonathan now and just say sort of for our behalf, what we've really found as a team is working with the third sector and creating this direct route into the team, the escalation route. We're seeing nothing but positive feedback at the speed of results, working with the food banks, etc. So from our point of view, we want to get more third sector involved with that, but always aware of the third sector has to be seen as completely independent from us for residents to want to trust them and not seen as just the council sidekicks, for want of a better word. So if anyone is interested, just feedback to Jonathan, myself, or John, who's not on the call, that was you, and we'll look at that. But we're finding that a really useful tool, because try as we might, there are residents who don't want to talk to us for whatever reason. They might have had a bad experience. We are what we are. We won't hide behind it, trying to collect money. But equally, we want to make sure that when they're due a relief, we apply it, because there's no point chasing money we're not entitled to chase. And I think the biggest learning for some of us in my team as well has been, because we've worked in this arena for, look at me, many years, decades, we kind of assume that residents know what they can claim. And certainly you see people saying, I didn't know I could have a single person discount. And I'm like staggered, but then I've worked here for 30 years, so not at Hackney, but so it becomes, so that's also part of it. Yes, we won't hide behind the fact we want to collect more money, because the council, as all councils are, is precariously financial position and needs to collect it. But it's also, and Abby, you picked it up, those barcodes and those phone numbers, they used to be hidden on the back of the bill, telling people what they could claim. We wanted to bring it to the front and get more people claiming what they're entitled to, because there's a lot who don't. And some it's they just don't bother, and some it's ignorance, the wrong word, but they just don't know what they can claim. So it's a twofold piece of work here. And so being far too nice for Jonathan on a Thursday afternoon, but that interaction that he worked really hard with the third sector on, given that escalation, and we're seeing dividends from that as well now, because it costs us a lot of money to take someone through a recovery process. And if we can avoid that, everyone wins. So that was it from me.
Thank you, Neil. Abby?
I just want to say 100% yes, Neil, everything. And also, I've got a few more questions, and I'm reflecting on the fact that I'm really excited about the change of a letter, which might just be something unique to public sector workers who are just wanting the best for residents. On the language side of things, Dan, you picked up what I was wondering as well. Do we have a process through by, when someone's filling out their information for council tax contact, for them to even indicate what their language preferences are? That's one thing I've wondered. I'll just ask all the questions together and you can field them in the best way, I suppose. The next one was more on when these go live, what the learning will look like. I'm sure you'll be looking at a lot of data. I was just curious what some of that might be. If you'll be looking at, say, how many people are accessing the QR code, working with some of our IT colleagues who have that information, or, what you expect in terms of the lag between going live with the letter and what that might mean for actual payments being kept up to date for people. And then the last one is more of a thought on connection. And Emma, it goes back to what you were saying on your reason why joining and what your work is. Thinking of, if you said if someone's missed a payment or they're late, the Stop the Knock team and the Here to Help team are really working in partnership. Emma, I'm thinking let's get you involved in that too. Get us those residents who are showing up on our systems as connected into support as early as possible as we can.
Yeah, so yes, we would like to measure the impact of this, obviously, and QR codes were something that was mentioned as, in respect of that particular part of what the information that's on the notice. So that would work. As I said, this time around, we didn't do a direct survey with residents. We just used the information that we learned from last time, because basically we didn't have time to do that. So we won't be able to go back to a focus group and find out what they think about it, for example. I'm hoping that we will see a drop of phone calls, and particularly the impact of final notices, because that's the notice that's having the biggest change, as I see it. There's a lot that was on the old one that shouldn't have been there and caused confusion. So, for example, it had the property reference number on there, absolutely not needed at all. And yet people were using that when they made a payment. So the payment wasn't going to their account, it was going into suspense. And then they would get another recovery notice later on, or get summons to court, or whatever it happened to be. And we'd only find out when they said, but I've paid all these late payments. So that was an easy thing, which I was very pleased to get removed. The gyro slip at the bottom is out of date. Whilst if it's used over the counter at a bank or the post office, the money will get to Hackney. It will be slower. It doesn't go into the council tax fund. It goes into the general fund and eventually finds its way into council tax. And as I said in my spiel, it's all about speed of response. We don't really have time to dwell when we're going through the recovery process. So that has been removed. You've got the barcode, and there's clearer information on the back about exactly how to pay, and where, and what the best way is. So I'm hoping that what I'm going to see is that when final notices hit, and as I say, they're the ones that cause the most trouble on the telephones, the biggest queues, the longest waits. I'm hoping to see a change in those. And I keep records from a long time, as Neil knows. But even just comparing to last year, I'm hoping to see a complete difference. And I will be able to then say, well, the only change has been that. So fingers crossed, everybody. Emma.
Thanks, Jonathan. Emma.
Thank you. Yeah, great work. Obviously, really, really important to go through that process, because that first letter was pretty jarring. And it's trying to separate out, isn't it, the difference between the can't pays and the won't pays. And I think what it brings to my mind most is the sort of intersection with the tenancy sustainment, because if chasing debt recovery costs us a lot of money, it's still nowhere near as much money as it costs us if someone loses their tenancy. They ultimately end up back at our front door one way or another. And so it's how, and sorry, my language is very flippant there, obviously, it's a horrendous impact on a personal level. But when we're talking council finances, how can we sort of look intersectionally at our data to say, oh, if we suspect they're in the can't pay and we've got this far on council tax, that is going to be affecting their ability to pay their rent. And it's sort of, I'm sure there are mechanisms in place, but I think we've got like the low income family tracker data, for example, that we could maybe reference with. And I understand the DWP are now better sort of sharing the data through that at long last. And the text messaging sounds like a great idea as well, because I've certainly had experience of residents just not opening letters because their mental overload is such that they don't even want to know what's inside. So overall, it sounds really positive.
Okay, Neil, I'll let you answer.
So, Emma, yeah. So at the minute, the answer to your question is we're very siloed and not joined up. All different systems, regulations, government, but etc., etc. There is a corporate debt policy. It was written about 10 years ago. And the main part of that is that rent is a priority. Although council tax is a priority debt in the eyes of the legislation, rent will always trump that for exactly the reason you said. Us making someone homeless or contributing to that, one is horrendous for them, two is hugely expensive for council. So there are possibly is going to be a project to look at a single view of debt, whereby we will look at, is it possible to manage an individual's debt across multiple council areas from one point? The answer is not very easily. That is a flippant off the cuff answer, because we all have our own systems. But you're right, we'll be looking, and I'm saying this because I've got a horrible idea I'm going to be involved in it, as much as I've tried to push it elsewhere, because council tax obviously touches more residents than in any other part of the council. So we are looking at improving it. And for my sins, I am reviewing the corporate debt policy. It won't change dramatically, but we might add words like ethical in. Just because as doesn't say ethical, it isn't unethical, but we have had a bit of a slap on the hand for it not saying ethical in it, because people assume it is unethical, but it isn't. But that will all be geared to trying to collect the debt at the lowest cost to the resident and the lowest cost to the council. But you hit the nail on the head, and as did Jonathan, it's knowing that someone is vulnerable, and that information may sit within the council, but it might be adult social care, and it may not be appropriate to share that with other departments. So we will do as much as we can, but there might be elements where, unless a resident opens up and tells us, we just won't know. So there's a lot of work to do in that space, don't get me wrong, and no council that I have any relationship with across London has a fully functioning, working single view of debt. But it's on all our agendas. I will have retired by the time it happens, I suspect, but we'll get there. But yeah. So, and if you do want to reach out to myself or Jonathan, happy to have a conversation. Obviously, we have rights to a lot more data about residents than any other council department because we're protecting the public purse. So where there's opportunities to share that data appropriately, we'd be more than happy to do that. But obviously, it has to be data we're legally allowed to get for the purposes of council tax. We can't just go digging because someone might own something elsewhere in the council. They're paying their council tax. We can't get that, but we're certainly looking at joining up where we can, and ourselves and the council's housing team is probably where we'll start, because if someone owes 10 grand of council tax, I'll put my bottom dollar, they probably owe at least that in rent.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Sorry, Rachel. Can I just add to what Neil said and in response to what Emma was asking, because we've actually got some level of looking at somebody's whole life already. We use or we're part of a number of teams that use data provided by Policy and Practice. So you get to see whether somebody's in council tax arrears, rent arrears, housing benefit overpayment. Plus, what benefits they ought to be entitled to, and aren't claiming. And that's really important. And the data drills right down to the actual house. So you start looking at an area, and then you look, and so that information is used every single day by our Stop and Knock team. Part of their work is to contact residents who are all in receipt of council tax reduction, and are about to go into some stage of recovery. So we look at them in advance, and the team makes active phone calls, or sends text messages when they can't get an answer, and they contact the person directly with that added information, and that's really, really good.
So you identify a specific cohort and then you proactively contact them based on that policy and practice lift data.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
How long we're going to have that policy and practice data, I don't know, because it's something that's going to gets reviewed every year, I think it is. But I'm aware that the council has built or is building its own data centre thing. I've not used it yet. It might take 10 years.
Jonathan, just to ask, do you have access to Searchlight from the DWP, which enables you, I believe, to look up individuals and what their what their entitlement to benefit is?
Yeah, no, we don't, because we're not allowed to under legislation. The housing benefit service and the housing benefit overpayment team, who come under me because they're debt recovery, they're entitled to the information, but we're not yet entitled to it. Now, if there happens to have been, for example, they had an overpayment as well, and that information has been accessed and then saved onto our system, we're then allowed to use it. But if we're already collecting for a housing HB overpayment, and then we've got another debt that we need to collect, well, the person can only pay one amount, really, and then it's a matter of, well, which is the most priority. And generally at the moment, I don't usurp something that's already in collection. I will just sit and wait in the queue. But yeah, there is probably the longest government project in history currently ongoing, which we were invited to. We saw the launch, which I think was something like 2007, and that was to provide data directly from the Inland Revenue, HMRC, and the DWP to enable councils to not use, for example, enforcement agents to collect, but instead to do attachments to benefit or attachments to earnings, which are far better. Everybody agrees. The council would much rather do that. It's more efficient, and levels of payment are set in set percentages in legislation, so you just get the right amount. So I registered right at the beginning, and every 5 years I send them a reminder to say we are still interested. And Neil did that recently as well, and it's still going on. But some councils are using it. They've got this pilot running, and they're just relief really that I haven't realised this needs to now be spread out to all councils. But I haven't done it yet.
So if you wanted an attachment of earnings, you'd have to go to court. Is that right?
Well, we have to have a liability order, yes. So we have to go
to
get a summons, and we have to do that for an attachment to benefits as well, which is something that also pains us because it means you're adding to the person's debt and they're the least able to pay. But that's what the legislation tells us we have to do. When we get that order, we will then, as priority, try and do an attachment to either benefits or earnings rather than going to enforcement agents. They are always our last resort. And in fact, we've actually got we set up a new program in our system to automatically move when we've got those data, when we've got that data in the system already, to automatically use that method of collection. So there's no decision to be made. It will just take that route. And, you know, several years to clear something, then every year, if they go into arrears again, it will just queue up behind it and stay on that route. And then we'll focus on those that are avoiding us properly. But it's hard to get that data. That's the trouble. A customer very rarely actually tells you who they're working for and what their payroll number is. We try to use that as a kind of bargaining thing to say, well, we'll make an arrangement with you over X amount of time, but I can only do that if I get the backup of your employment data or whatever. But then you don't know you're getting the real data anyway. So in the vast majority of cases, arrangements are just made on the basis of a phone call or whatever information has been put in our arrangement form that's online. And we'll take it on trust to start with. If it fits our parameters for a reasonable period of time for that type of case, then we will set it up and we will hope that it gets paid. But it is in hope rather than expectation as such.
Okay, thanks. Chanel, did that answer your question about whether there's a means by which overpayments are assessed? How they work?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Neil.
Yeah, actually, just the last bit of this, just so everyone in the group, so obviously there was a council tax consultation last year, and every borough that I spoke to across London have all replied within it that we would like the government to remove the need to have a liability order to do an attachment of benefits and likewise for attachment of earnings. Because the attachment of benefits, we're adding over £100 of our costs to the debt just to get an attachment to claim circa £5 a week from the resident. So it's crazy. We're asking government to basically say, if the resident agrees to it, we can do that at an earlier stage and without those costs. And obviously relying on government to change the legislation, and I think they will, because the only reason we need the liability order is that confirms they owe the money. But if they're willing to agree to that, it means we can start the order much earlier in the year and they don't incur those costs. But we'll see if government do what councils have asked. It doesn't always happen, but we live in hope that it kind of makes common sense to everyone. Well, to every council I've spoken to, we're all asking for the same, because you'll have some councils who all that attachment does is clear some of the costs off, and then next year there's another summons, and it's the debt is you're never getting to the debt. You're just playing around the edges. So yeah, that's it for me on that.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And I guess it's a bit like this data issue, isn't it? All we can do is keep plugging away and using our networks and using our points of influence, like with members and so on. And I know that there has been movement in relation to some data sets. So, for example, I think the DWP is going to share data on families with children on universal credit, so that they can, because all children on universal credit is going to be eligible for free school meals from September. So I think there is starting to be some movement, but it is a slow process. So we'll monitor that with very closely. Does anyone else have anything to add? If not, I'm going to stop the recording.